Do you know what your dissertation is about? That is one of the most common questions that I find myself asking dissertation students. Do you understand what it is that you're actually looking at? Do you have a clear set of aims and objectives? Could you summarize your entire thesis in just a couple of sentences? Often, if we feel like we're hitting a brick wall, or if we feel like we're constantly coming up against challenges, or we're not quite sure where to go, normally it's because we're finding it harder to act with purpose. We're not quite sure what direction we're going in because we're not sure what the identity of our dissertation is. So in this section, I'm going to be talking about the importance of evaluation and creating a good story and a good narrative. So the challenge I'm setting you here is, can you summarize your thesis in just a couple of sentences? It is such hard work, but it is key to making sure that you're writing something good. So when you're flicking around on Netflix and you're trying to find a film to watch, or you're Googling and you're looking at the film reviews, if a film can accurately summarize what it's about in one sentence, you're way more likely to watch it. If it's not clear what it's about, or if the description of it is massive, you're not even going to get to the bottom. You're not even going to be paying attention to it. You think this feels too muddled, too confusing. I don't actually know if it hits the main things that I'm interested in. Any sort of narrative needs to have a clear sense of structure. It needs to have a clear sense of a story that you are telling, and a dissertation is no different whatsoever. And an example that I commonly use is thinking about, what do you want the storyline to be? And really, the best stories are the simple ones. So think about your favorite films. And I am going to reflect on two films that I've watched many, many, many times, Finding Nemo and Frozen. And yes, I'm about to compare your dissertation to Finding Nemo and Frozen. Finding Nemo is a fantastic film. And the reason it's a fantastic film is because it's really, really simple. The storyline can be summarized in just one sentence. Father loses son, then finds son, then brings them home. That is everything that happens within that story. And because it's so simple, I don't have to be thinking as a viewer, what's going on here? Why is this happening? What's the overarching argument that's going on here? No, I know that that is always the quest that they're on. And that means that we can meet elaborate, rich and deep, pardon the pun, characters around it, because the story is simple and because the story can be defined very quickly. However, and I hope this isn't libelous, but Frozen feels more like a story that weaves lots of different storylines together. At any one time, there's two or three things happening at once. So what ends up happening, if you were to describe what is Frozen about, well, actually, you could describe it as any number of sort of 3 or 4 different interlinking stories. It's harder to settle on one key idea that film gets across, or one key quest that gets across. And that can be the same with dissertations. Oftentimes what we have is we've got loads of ideas that are rattling around in our head, and we just try and get them all down, and we try and smush them together to make them feel like they're somehow satisfying, but it rarely happens. What normally happens is we've got all these ideas and we put them all down and we say, right, I'm going to write about this, I'm going to write about that, and I'm going to write about the other. But what ends up happening is that by the time we try and bring it together in the discussion or the conclusion, it all falls apart. They don't really relate to each other how we thought, and we end up just summarizing what each of the 4 said. So what you're going to do is you're going to figure out, what is your overall argument? What's the main thing that you're trying to put across here? Are you suggesting that organizational change should always be understood as a political process? Are you suggesting that reflection is important in management practice? Are you suggesting that you are trying to understand the impact of charisma and team working? What is it that you're actually trying to drive at? And when you're thinking about that, you can also think, what is it that makes your work different? What's the gap that you're trying to fill? What are you trying to tell people that hasn't been looked at before? And that doesn't need to be grand. It doesn't need to be massive. It doesn't need to be Nobel Peace Prize winning. It just needs to be a little gap somewhere that you're telling us something that people haven't looked at before. And that might be a gap in the literature, it might be a gap in the practice, but trying to locate something that is new. But your main task, and this is something to work with your supervisor on, is think, if I was going to describe this thesis just quickly, what would I say? And you can also think about that if you were in a job interview and they said, describe your thesis, or if you were doing the elevator pitch. That is what you should always be developing and always be focusing on. Write it down, put it on your computer, have it on your desk, use it as something that you always come back to. Do it at the start of the project, do it a few weeks into the project, do it at the midpoint, and do it just before you submit. It's the hardest thing you're going to have to do because it's conceptual. It's not just a technical task, but once you've got it, it means that you can act with purpose, and that is a beautiful thing. And while we're talking about being clear on your outcomes, you also need to make sure that you're downloading and focusing on the marking criteria for the dissertation. What are they actually asking of you? What are they asking you to do? What are they asking you to achieve? Normally in a dissertation, you're going to be marked on your ability to use theory and literature. You're going to be marked on your ability to apply or analyze that theory and literature and bring in some sort of real world understanding or real world examples. And you're going to be marked on your ability to evaluate and to create arguments and to create suggestions on what should happen in the future. But in order to make sure that you're working smarter and not harder, make sure that you're hitting the dissertation criteria. This isn't just an empty 8,000 words, 10,000 words, 15,000 words that you're trying to write. This is going to be very specific in terms of what your markers are going to be looking for. So another question that you might ask your supervisor, or something you might just think in advance, is, what is it that you are actually trying to find out? What is it that you are being asked to do? What is it that you are being marked on? And make sure you do all of those things and make sure that you are hitting all of those marks. And so many students forget about the marking criteria. They just write a dissertation that they think is good, which is cool. That will hit most of it. But there might be specific things in that marking criteria, maybe asked you to look at a particular number of papers, or they have to be particularly current. Maybe it's asking you to create a model, or maybe it's asking you to create certain recommendations. That marking criteria might give you clues as to how you can perform even better. So that, in coupled with the idea of having a very clear outcome of what you want to achieve, that is what's going to make sure that you are getting good high marks for your evaluations. All right, folks, we're almost there. Our last section, we are going to be talking about what happens when you hit some bumps in the road. Come back after the break and I'll see you there.